If you are not training speed and power with your clients, no matter who those clients are, I think you're doing them a disservice. Power, I think, is something that is not as frequently trained and much less well understood than it should be. How you going, guys? Dan here from Range of Motion. Today I want to talk to you about training power, why it's important to train power, how you should be training power. This is a little bit of a sneak peek as well of one of the modules that we'll be discussing or covering in October's Perth Fitness Industry Professional Development event, which is one of two events we're running, the second being the Fitness Business Summit. I'll post details to that below. So firstly, power. What are the benefits of training power? Well, obviously, if you're looking at an athletic population that you're working with, they're pretty clear cut. Someone who's more powerful will be able to throw the ball harder, hit the tackle harder, accelerate faster, kick further, throw further, punch harder, kick harder. From an athletic population, it's not hard to understand why power is going to be important. But how about for a general population, for people who are seeing you just maybe to improve their everyday health? They want to improve their lifespan, they want to improve their health span. For these people, it's maybe not so clear cut, but if you look at the age-related changes in human physiology, we tend to get this preferential atrophy of type 2 muscle fibers. That is those fibers more involved with those fast twitch movements. And as we know, as we age, strength is super important, that we hold on to our strength with age to improve our functionality. But there's actually a higher correlation between loss of power and things like trips and falls and associated conditions in older age than there is between strength and these factors. So as we age, our focus needs to be, and our focus with our clients needs to be less about let's maintain strength as we age, although that's of course part of it, and more about how can we maintain power. So what's the difference? Well, power is a product not only of force but also velocity. It's not only how heavy can we lift, how much load can we move, but it's how quickly can we do it. And of course that gives us the force velocity curve, where we look at a relationship between how fast we're moving and how much strength or force we are producing. And of course we can come up with an equation for power. Power is force multiplied by distance divided by time. So the force and distance, if we're trying to generate power, should be as high as possible, as much force as we can over as large a range as we can. But it's the time that we divide all that by that is absolutely key, which is allowing us to not only move a lot of force, but to do so powerfully with speed. So when we are training power with our clients, there are three key principles that I think we should be aware of. The first, of course, is that stretch, shorten cycle. It's our ability to preload a muscle tendon unit and then to be able to explosively use that force that we have loaded up. Now, we see a stretch, shorten cycle in cardiac muscles as well, of course, as skeletal muscles. If you think about it like pulling an elastic band back, holding it, letting it go, it won't go as far as if you pull back and release it straight away. That's that stored energy that we have in our muscles. So that's the first thing we need to be aware of as we are training power. The second thing that we should be aware of with training power is that we naturally slow down or decelerate a movement towards the end of a range. Imagine you're doing a squat. You get through that sticking point and you get into that last third of the squat, and we naturally tend to slow down and just rely on that momentum to lock out that movement. We do this as a protection mechanism. We don't want to explode too aggressively because at the top of range we feel that aggressive lock of the hips and knees, and we're actually doing this to protect our body from this hyperextension of these joints. So something that we can take into account is what are some strategies that we can come up with so we're not slowing down or decelerating our movement at end of range. Imagine you're throwing a javelin. If you were to decelerate at the end, it's not going to go very far. Imagine you're kicking a ball. If you were to decelerate at the end, it's not going to be very effective. Imagine that in 20 or 30 years, your clients catch their foot on an uneven surface, and instead of being able to move it quickly to increase their base of support to stop that fall, they start to decelerate that. Their base of support is then going to be not covering their center of mass, and they're going to fall over. And the third is PAP, post-activation potentiation, which is when you activate the muscle groups by doing something heavy, then you go immediately into doing that movement much lighter and much faster. We're basically turning up the volume on those nerves and muscle fibers that are responsible for the movement you're about to do. So those are the three key sort of things. The first being that stretch shorten cycle, the second being the speed and acceleration continuing to the end of range or even beyond, which I'll talk about in a moment. And the third is that post-activation potentiation, where we're firing up those fibers, those motor units to be able to create a lot of power. So what I want to do, guys, is talk to you about the 5 points on the force velocity curve. So if you imagine that we are graphing force, let's just call that how much power you're producing, and we're graphing velocity, the y and the x-axis. And what we get is a relationship between how much force you can produce and the velocity at which you're doing it. If we look at something up the top here, this is going to be very high force but very low velocity. Something down here, we have very low force and very high velocity. Maybe this is something like a max deadlift. Maybe this is something like a 50-meter max effort sprint on a track. So we have 5 different points here. So let me just talk briefly about each of these points and how we can train that point. So the first is your max strength. Max strength is right up the top. High force, very low velocity. Max strength is basically your heavy powerlifting. We're talking 80-90% plus of your maxes. Heavy squats, heavy pulls, deads, and heavy presses, these sort of movements. And although they're important for building max strength, the power training benefit is not great here. Though, as we'll talk about, it is an important part of training the entire power curve. As we now move down this power curve, we go from max strength to speed strength. And speed strength is where we start to still have high loads, but now we start to increase the velocity. So these will be elements of Olympic weightlifting, for example, where it's still a high load movement. So we're still generating a decent amount of force, although it's not peak force. We now start to move, though, a little bit quicker. As we come down that curve even further, we now start to get to peak power. And this is the point where we're starting to optimize that equation, not compromising speed for more force, not compromising force for more speed or velocity. And these will be moderate loads for now higher speeds. So these will be things like the second pull of Olympic lifting, clean pulls, snatch pulls. These will be loaded jumps. So jumps where you're adding a bit of load to your body. Ballistic throws, maybe with like a medicine ball or a dead ball. Weighted sprints, maybe with a prowler or some other form of resistance. And to find that peak power, you're basically looking at about 30 to 40% of your max. So for any movement, 30% to 40% of your max done as explosively as possible. That finds that perfect sweet spot in between force and velocity. As we move further down that force velocity curve, we now start to move more towards the velocity, more towards peak velocity on that x-axis. And this takes us to speed strength. Of course, we had strength speed as those Olympic lifting elements, peak power, now down to speed strength. And speed strength is low load, high speed, but not yet plyometric. So plyometric is where there's a very fast stretch shorten cycle, as we touched on already, a very explosive land and change of directions. Now, with your speed strength work, not necessarily plyometric. So it's not a fast repetitive bounce. We're looking at something like a counter movement jump, where you load up, there's a slower stretch, shorten cycle, still producing as much power as you can, still producing as much velocity as you can, but it's not a true plyometric. Slower stretch, shorten cycle. Now we move down to max velocity, which is max speed. This is very low load, very high speed, and these are true plyometrics. Things like sprints, some sort of movement with a repetitive ground contact, leaps and bounds, depth jumps, these sort of things. And again, guys, all the strategies that we would employ in each of these 5 areas, we will talk about more in October's event, the Perth Fitness Industry PD event. So those are the 5 categories or 5 things that we need to be ticking the boxes on. And the aim of our training for our clients, again, regardless of whether they're Gen Pop, whether they're clinic-based clients, whether they're athletes, is to move this entire curve to the right. So here's this curve with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points on it. We want to move that entire curve to the right. if you train only one certain area of this curve, you're going to compromise your ability to improve the other areas. If you're someone who is a power lifter who is only training max strength, you're going to compromise some of these other more speed related areas, and you're going to compromise peak power. And of course, as a power lifter, you don't only want to move with high force, but also high power. You're trying to keep that velocity, that speed as high as possible. So if you only train strength, this is going to improve and move further to the right, but everything else will start to drop away. And that curve, instead of looking like this, is going to look like that and drop off very quickly. If you're a sprinter who only trains that real sort of max velocity, that peak speed work, although that may improve, the other areas of that curve are going to start to drop away and it will flatten out. The key here being you should be incorporating all 5 areas, all 5 points on that strength velocity curve into the training for your clients, into the training for yourself. So my question to you would be, are you biasing the training unconsciously of either yourself or your clients towards one of these 5 areas? If you are, I really do think you're missing an opportunity here to train power, which, as we've already talked about, is beneficial for all sort of populations and a general population, not just an athletic population. So how do we actually prescribe this to our clients? Well, first we make sure that we are training all of those 5 different areas. We make sure we're using some sort of post-activation potentiation, which is where we go very heavy with the movement. I'm talking 80 to 90% plus, and then straight into the fast power high velocity work. So maybe you're going to do 2 heavy banded deadlifts, which are going to be 80% plus, and then you'll go straight into a series of 6 broad jumps, for example. Maybe you're going to do a very heavy quarter depth squat, which is now more of a vertical type movement, a vertical hip action, where you go super heavy, maybe 100% of your max high bar back squat for 2 quarter depth, and then you go straight into 3 depth jumps into a max height vertical leap, or a depth jump into a max height straight leg landing box jump. So you're taking a movement and then coupling it with a very similar movement with much higher velocity. Very short sets on these. This is not high fatigue. If you are fatiguing people, if their muscles are burning, if they're limited by anything other than their ability to move extremely explosively and extremely fast, you're going to compromise their ability to move extremely explosively and extremely fast. You need to be able to keep the power as the limiting factor. You don't want relative stamina or localized peripheral muscular endurance or cardiorespiratory endurance to be a limiting factor here. It's going to compromise your results on this. And finally, the work to rest ratios, you're looking for about a 1 to 10. Now, this is going to do 2 things. Firstly, from a central and peripheral fatigue point of view, it's going to allow some sort of recovery there. But from an energy system point of view, it's going to allow time for the sort of ATP to recirculate for your phosphocreatine system to recover to a small degree. So guys, those are my key sort of principles in how and why you should be training power. Maybe some of the tools that you can use. Again, this is just a bit of a sneak peek, guys, of some of the stuff that we have coming up. If you are interested in any of this, I would encourage you to check out the link that I'll post below to tickets for our 2020 Perth Fitness Industry PD event. This is one of 12 modules that we'll be covering over a pretty massive and intense learning day. Guys, if you have any more questions on power, you would like any more resources, I do have some blogs and stuff that I've written on this topic, so please post below and I'll post that blog so you can see a nice summarized version of what we've been talking about. All right, thanks for joining me, guys. See you next time.